So the intention is always, just so pure.
Oh, absolutely. Always starts out that way.
Right. You wake up on a Saturday morning, the sunlight is hitting the floorboards just right, and you look around your space, and you think to yourself with complete sincerity that today is the day you are finally going to get your life in order.
The big cleaning day.
Exactly. You're going to clean the room. And it's a deceptively simple goal. You grab a trash bag, you start making a pile for laundry over here, a pile for things to donate over there.
I know exactly where this is going.
Yeah, because for about 10 minutes, you are the picture of a highly functional, responsible adult managing your environment. But then, an hour later, the reality of what actually happens sets in.
You're just sitting on the floor.
Sitting completely cross-legged on the floor. The trash bag is totally empty. The laundry is completely untouched. Instead, you're hunched over, staring at your phone, scrolling deep, deep into your camera roll.
You are miles away from the present moment.
Miles away. Laughing out loud at an absolutely terrible haircut you had, like 5 years ago. Or maybe just staring quietly at a photo of a front porch from a house you haven't lived in for a decade.
Yeah, I mean, it is the ultimate human detour. We set out to organize our physical, tangible space, the reality we currently inhabit, and we inevitably end up getting completely swallowed by the architecture of our own past.
That's so true.
And the physical mess around you actually gets worse, because in the process of looking for a place to put your old shoes, you uncover a shoebox full of old concert tickets and notebooks.
And suddenly the cleaning project is just abandoned.
Completely abandoned.
And the fascinating part of it, you don't even care that the room is a disaster. Because you are time traveling. You are experiencing that profound, almost gravitational pull backward.
Right.
That feeling, that specific moment of being completely hijacked by a memory is the exact territory we are exploring today.
It's a big topic.
It is. So to you, the listener sitting there right now, whether you're commuting in traffic, folding that endless pile of laundry, or maybe you are the one currently sitting on the floor,
Right.
surrounded by old photos, we are inviting you into a very reflective space today. We're essentially setting up a room for the three of us to unpack something incredibly universal.
And to build out this discussion, we are pulling from a fascinating synthesis of materials that, at first glance, I mean, they might seem like they belong in completely different universes.
Definitely.
On one side of the spectrum, we have deeply intimate personal archives. We're looking at English language conversational diaries, specifically a beautifully raw transcript of a man who simply sat down, turned on a recorder, and started asking his mother about her life, her childhood, and the physical diaries left behind by her own father.
Which is just so intimate. But then on the other end of the spectrum, we're looking at highly complex, data-driven macroeconomic forecasts.
Quite the jump.
Yeah, we have a detailed intelligence report from Sky News Arabia projecting global travel and hospitality trends for the year 2026.
Which, it requires a bit of an intellectual bridge to connect those two.
A little bit, yeah.
You have the quiet intimacy of a mother reading a World War II-era diary on one end, and predictive algorithms running sustainable tourism in the Middle East on the other. But the connective tissue between these two extremes is just profound.
And that connective tissue is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We are exploring the absolute psychological grip that the past has on the human mind.
How it just holds on to us.
Exactly. We are going to break down how we process the raw data of childhood memory and why we all carry around this heavy collective regret of failing to ask our parents and grandparents the right questions when we actually had the chance.
It's such a common feeling.
And ultimately, we're going to explore how this deep-seated, almost desperate yearning for the simplicity of our past isn't just a personal feeling, it is actively rewiring the global economy.
It's moving markets.
Yeah. That yearning is fundamentally dictating the future of a multi-billion-dollar travel industry as we head into 2026.
It's a trajectory that moves from the microscopic neurological level of how a single memory fires in the brain, all the way to the macroscopic level of global capital allocation.
Right.
Because how a society remembers its past and what it misses about that past directly dictates what it's willing to pay for in the future.
So let's start at the absolute foundation of this, the anatomy of the memory itself.
Okay.
When we talk about being pulled into the past, we have to acknowledge that memory doesn't usually function like a filing cabinet.
No, it really doesn't.
You don't often sit down, open a drawer in your logical brain, and say, well, I would now like to review the events of June 14th, 1998.
If only it were that easy.
Right. Memories don't wait for an invitation. They ambush you.
They bypass the rational chronological processing centers of the brain entirely. And the materials we're looking at highlight this phenomenon perfectly by focusing on sensory triggers.
Ah, yeah.
When you look at how human memory storage actually works, the deepest, most visceral recollections aren't accessed through rational thought. They are accessed through the senses. Olfactory memory, so. The sense of smell is particularly potent here because of how the brain is actually wired.
There's a highly specific, very evocative anecdote in our materials that illustrates this perfectly.
Hmm.
An individual describes going about a completely mundane day, so walking into a room and suddenly catching the scent of old books.
Just that specific smell.
Yeah, just that very specific, slightly sweet, dusty degradation of paper and binding glue. And in an instant, without any conscious effort at all, they are completely transported back to their grandmother's house.
It's wild how fast it happens.
It really isn't just a vague, foggy recollection. It is a full-body transportation. They feel the exact temperature of the room. They feel the texture of the carpet.
What?
They inhabit the exact emotional state of being a child in that specific space.
And the mechanics of that moment are incredible because when you smell those old books, the sensory information doesn't go through the thalamus, which acts as the brain's logical relay station for most other senses.
Okay, so it skips the logic center.
Exactly. It routes directly to the olfactory bulb, which has a direct neural superhighway to the amygdala and the hippocampus, the regions responsible for emotion and memory formulation.
Wow.
So your adult analytical brain is effectively locked out of the process. For a fraction of a second, your nervous system isn't just remembering your childhood, it genuinely believes it is reliving it.
That is so powerful. And when we isolate that specific childhood emotional state, the one that the smell of old paper unlocks the materials, spend a significant amount of time contrasting it with the baseline emotional state of adulthood.
Which is a bit of a stark contrast.
To say the least, the defining characteristic of that childhood state, the thing we are all secretly starving for when we get ambushed by these memories, is a feeling of total, absolute freedom.
It's an existence largely unburdened by logistical consequence.
Yeah, and the comparison made in the materials about getting ice cream captures this perfectly.
I love this example.
Right. Think about what getting ice cream meant when you were 8 years old. It was a massive, monumental event. It was an adventure.
The stakes were huge.
Yes, the sheer anticipation of pulling into the parking lot, the overwhelming excitement of looking through the glass at 30 different colors and flavors, the debate over a cone versus a cup.
A very serious debate.
Very serious. The stakes felt enormous in the best possible way. Your only job in that moment was to experience the joy of the sugar and the cold.
Because as a child, your primary cognitive function is absorption and discovery. You are an experiential sponge.
But the contrast drawn with adulthood is stark, and frankly, it's a bit sobering.
It really is.
Because what is the adult experience of getting ice cream? It is a solitary, purely functional trip to the supermarket.
Sadly, yeah.
You walk down the freezer aisle under fluorescent lights, you grab a pint of something familiar, you scan it at the self-checkout, drive home in silence, and you eat it alone on the couch while watching television to decompress from the work week.
The magical adventure has devolved into a coping mechanism.
That's exactly it. The ice cream hasn't changed. The dairy and the sugar are identical. What has changed is the cognitive load of the person consuming it.
That transition from child to adult is fundamentally a transition from experiencing the world to managing the world.
Managing the world.
Adulthood requires you to manage the logistics of survival rent, relationships, career progression, health insurance.
Right, the endless logistics.
And in that perpetual state of management, the capacity for simple, unadulterated thrills is severely diminished. So when a sensory trigger suddenly cuts through that management state and drops you back into the pure experience of youth, it produces a highly complex emotional cocktail.
Which brings us to the actual definition of nostalgia. We use that word constantly, usually to describe like an affinity for 90s cartoons or vintage fashion.
Yeah, very casually.
But the psychological definition provided in our materials is much heavier. Nostalgia is defined here as a complex mixture of warm affection inextricably bound to a slight lingering sadness.
And the etymology of the word itself is revealing.
Oh, what is it?
It comes from the Greek nostos, meaning homecoming, and algos, meaning pain or ache. So it is the literal pain of desiring a homecoming.
The pain of a homecoming. That's heavy.
It is. The affection is present because the memory of The grandmother's house, the childhood ice cream trip is beautiful, and you are deeply grateful that it's part of your foundational architecture. But the sadness is a quiet devastation because you are fundamentally aware that the door to that specific time is permanently closed.
You can drive back to your grandmother's town. You can even walk into the physical house if it's still there, but you cannot walk into it as that specific 8-year-old child.
The context has evaporated.
The people who made it magical have aged or passed away. You can never get the exact variables to align in that way again.
Which often leads to a sense of fatalism about growing up. There's a common cultural narrative that adulthood effectively assassinates the child inside of you, that the wonder is simply dead.
And this is where the materials introduce a concept that I just find absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
Because it challenges that fatalistic narratives completely.
It really does.
The question is posed, does adulthood actually kill the dream? Does it extinguish the child? And the answer presented is no. It doesn't kill it, it just pushes it into the background.
Right.
There is an analogy here that I want to thoroughly unpack because it visualizes this psychological process perfectly.
The analogy of the window.
Yes, the window. Let's picture this together. Imagine your core essential self, the pure discovering child we were just talking about,
Yeah.
as a massive, beautiful window in a room.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
When you were young, the room is completely empty. The light is just pouring through that window, illuminating every single corner. That light is your curiosity, your unburdened joy, your inherent personality before the world got its hands on you. The window is the dominant, defining feature of the entire space.
It is completely unobstructed.
But then, you inevitably grow up. And growing up means acquiring things. It means adulthood starts delivering boxes to your room. Heavy, opaque, demanding boxes.
Those are the boxes.
First, you get a box labeled financial independence. You have to figure out how to pay for your own life, so you set that box down right in the middle of the room. Then comes a box labeled career ambition.
Right on top of the first one.
Exactly. Then a particularly heavy box called other people's expectations. You get a box of relationship complexities, a box of physical exhaustion, a box of societal norms, a box of fear of failure.
The room is getting pretty full.
And over the years, day by day, decade by decade, you just keep stacking these boxes. And because you're so busy managing the delivery of all these boxes, you don't even realize where you were stacking them. You were stacking them right in front of the window.
Until the inevitable point where the boxes are piled so high and so deep that they block out the light entirely.
Exactly. You stand in the center of your adult life, you look around, and all you see is cardboard.
Just endless cardboard.
You see bills, you see emails, you see social obligations. The room is dark, and it is cluttered. And because it has been so long since you felt the light, you genuinely forget that the window was ever there. You assume the room was always just a dark storage unit for your responsibilities.
But this reframes the entire concept of losing our youth. It isn't a death, it is an obscuring.
An obscuring. I like that word for it.
Yeah, the core self, the capacity for wonder, is still entirely intact behind that wall of adult logistics. It hasn't degraded at all. It is simply muffled.
Which explains exactly what is happening during a wave of nostalgia. When you smell those old books or when you hear a specific chord progression from a song you loved when you were 14, it's a momentary structural collapse of those boxes.
It's the sudden, unexpected clearing of the clutter. And, the sources note a very specific pattern regarding when these feelings hit us.
Like when?
They rarely occur when we are in the middle of a high-stakes meeting or actively navigating heavy traffic. They occur in the transitional, quiet moments. You're washing the dishes, or you're driving on an empty highway, or you're just lying awake at night.
Oh, that makes sense, because in those moments, you aren't actively managing the boxes.
Yeah.
You aren't opening them, sorting them, or defending them.
Your management brain power is down.
And in that quiet, a tiny gap opens up between the box of tiredness and the box of mortgage. A single beam of light from the window hits the floor. And that old part of you quietly taps you on the shoulder to remind you that it is still there.
And the emotional overwhelmingness of nostalgia is the shock of realizing your own continuity. You realize that beneath the accumulated layers of adult survival tactics, you are still fundamentally the exact same entity that once found absolute joy in a trip to get ice cream.
And building that core entity, building that window, required a specific environment that we entirely lose as adults. The materials touch on this beautifully when discussing the concept of nurturing passions.
It's such an important point.
When you're a kid, you have this immense grace period to just try things and fail at them without it becoming an existential crisis. The insight here is that you have to try 10 things to find the 2 things that fit perfectly.
It's the scientific method applied to personal development, driven purely by trial and error, without the burden of ROI,
Mhm.
return on investment.
Exactly. The text mentions a girl who decides to try ballet. She signs up, she goes to the classes, and it turns out she is objectively terrible at ballet. She has no rhythm, no grace, and she hates the tights.
It happens.
It does. But the failure doesn't ruin her life. She doesn't lose her income or her social standing. Ballet just gets crossed off the list. But during that same era of her life, she wanders into a library, discovers books, and finds a passion that will sustain her for the next 70 years.
A huge win.
Or you have a kid who tries out for basketball. Maybe they're mediocre. They aren't going to the NBA. But standing on that court, passing the ball, they meet a kid who becomes their absolute best friend for the rest of their life.
Because the mechanism of discovery is what matters, not the external success of the activity.
Right.
Childhood is a sandbox where the primary objective is internal mapping. You are figuring out what resonates with your specific frequency. Adulthood, on the other hand, demands that almost all of our activities have a productive, defensible outcome.
We just can't afford to fail the same way.
No, we don't try 10 things to find 2 anymore because trying 8 things and failing is viewed by the adult brain as a massive waste of time and resources.
We curate our lives so heavily to avoid failure that we accidentally eliminate the possibility of serendipitous discovery. We lock ourselves out of the sandbox.
You really do.
So we have established this profound internal landscape. We all have this window, we all have these boxes, and we all mourn the loss of that grace period. But the deep dive takes a massive, crucial turn here.
This is where it gets really interesting.
Because there is a moment in every human life, usually somewhere in our 20s or 30s, where a cognitive earthquake happens. We spend so much time obsessing over our own window, our own lost youth, and our own heavy boxes. And then one day, we look at our parents and the ground just shifts beneath our feet.
We realize with terrifying clarity that they had a window too.
It's wild to think about.
It is one of the most profound psychological transitions a human being can undergo. Moving from the egocentric viewpoint of a child, where parents exist merely as fixtures in your own narrative, to the empathetic viewpoint of an adult, where you recognize your parents as fully autonomous, complex individuals who existed long before you arrived.
And this transition brings us into the next critical phase of our exploration, unboxing the family archive. Because while we are busy unstacking our own metaphorical boxes to find our childhood light, we eventually find ourselves tasked with opening the literal, physical boxes that belong to our parents and grandparents.
And this is where the source materials move from broad psychological concepts into incredibly intimate, granular territory. We are examining an audio transcript from Luke's English podcast.
Yes.
In this recording, a man named Lou sits down with his mother, Gil. The entire purpose of the recording is to capture a conversation about their family history. They are in the process of sifting through physical boxes of the past.
And the emotional weight of this process is palpable, even just reading the transcript.
Mm.
Gil describes the tactile experience of sorting through old photographs, holding fragile, handwritten letters, and most significantly, discovering and reading her own grandfather's, her father's personal diary.
Yeah, our father's diary.
I want to pause and just think about the gravity of that object.
It's massive.
Imagine holding the physical leather-bound notebook where your father, a man you only ever knew as an authority figure, secretly wrote down his private fears, his uncertainties, and his unfiltered thoughts decades before you were even born.
Engaging with an artifact like that forces what we can term an empathy shift.
An empathy shift.
Yeah, Luke articulates this beautifully in the conversation. When we are young, we are biologically and psychologically incapable of seeing the whole picture. A child's survival depends on viewing their parents as infallible institutions.
You look at your mother or your father and you just see the provider, the rule maker, the protector.
Exactly. You do not have the capacity to see a 25-year-old person who is terrified, unsure of their career, insecure about their relationships, and desperately trying to figure out how to keep a baby alive.
Because it's a survival mechanism.
Yeah.
If a 5-year-old truly understood how clueless and terrified their parents actually were, the child would be paralyzed with anxiety.
Right. You need to believe your parents have all the answers.
You assume they arrived on this earth as fully formed, confident adults in sensible shoes, ready to instruct you on how the world works. You simply do not comprehend that they were once teenagers sneaking out of the house, or young adults getting their hearts broken, or rookies making massive mistakes at their first jobs.
And the tragic irony, as the materials suggest, is that we generally do not grant our parents this humanity until we are forced to endure the adult milestones ourselves.
Which is such a hard truth.
True generational empathy is rarely achieved through conversation. It is achieved through shared suffering.
Wow.
It isn't until you are holding your own crying infant at 3 in the morning, or staring at a mortgage document you barely understand, or sitting in a hospital waiting room for a sick partner, that the context finally clicks.
You look backward and think, my parents went through this exact same terror, this exact same exhaustion, and they did it decades ago without any of the modern tools I have.
You finally acquire the context necessary to understand who they actually are. But that context arrives with a devastating side effect.
It arrives with a heavy, almost suffocating weight of regret.
This regret is the absolute center of gravity in Gil's reflection. As she is reading her father's diary, she stumbles upon a profound entry. Her father had taken the time to write down a piece of wisdom that had been imparted to him by his own mother-in-law.
The generational folding here is just incredible. You have Luke recording his mother Gil, who is reading her father's diary, where her father is quoting the advice of his mother-in-law.
It's 4 generations of human hindsight communicating across time.
And the wisdom the mother-in-law imparted was this. She warned him that one day you get older and you experience a very sudden, jarring realization. You wake up and realize that the entire cohort of people from your early life has died.
Everyone.
The parents, the aunts, the uncles, the older neighbors, all the people who knew you when you were young, the people who hold the context of your beginnings, who remember your childhood home and the way your grandparents spoke, they are all gone.
And when that realization hits, you are left with a deep, aching regret that you did not ask them enough questions about their inner lives and their historical reality while you still had the chance.
That concept just completely stops you in your tracks. It is universally true. We all intrinsically know that the older generation possesses irreplaceable historical and emotional data, yet we routinely fail to interview them.
The materials provide us with these incredibly specific, heartbreaking examples of lost histories, questions that Gil suddenly realized she never asked her own parents. For instance, her father served in World War II.
Which is arguably one of the most monumental, life-altering, and traumatizing events a human being could participate in during the 20th century.
Absolutely.
But Gil admits in the transcript that when she was a child, she viewed her father's participation in the war through a completely naive, sanitized lens. She absorbed the cultural fairy tale.
As children do.
Right. She thought her dad going to war, winning, and coming home was just a clean narrative of heroism. She imagined he walked through the front door, hung up his uniform, and it was simply happily ever after.
But it isn't until she was a fully grown adult, with an understanding of human psychology and trauma, that she realized the sheer absurdity of that narrative.
The adult mind recognizes the vast, terrifying complexity of returning from a global theater of mechanized slaughter to a quiet, domestic life in the suburbs.
The transition from being a soldier focused purely on survival to being a father concerned with lawn care and school grades is a psychological chasm.
But Gil never asked him about it. She never sat down and said, "Dad, what was it actually like to come home? How hard was it to adjust? Did you feel alienated from us? Were you terrified?"
Because by the time she developed the maturity and the psychological vocabulary to formulate those questions, the opportunity to ask them was largely gone. She had accepted the child's fairy tale for too long.
And this lack of inquiry wasn't limited to the battlefield. The materials highlight that we are equally blind to the extraordinary domestic achievements of our parents.
That's right.
Gil reflects on the fact that while her father was away fighting in Europe, her mother managed to purchase a house on her own.
We have to unpack the gravity of that for a moment. This was the 1940s.
Yeah.
The social and legal infrastructure was not designed for a woman to act as a sole financial entity in real estate. The sheer logistical hurdles, the negotiations, the financial maneuvering, and the emotional fortitude required to buy a house as a woman while your husband is overseas in a war zone is staggering.
It is a massive triumph of agency and resilience.
Yet Gil realizes she never asked her mother how she accomplished it. She never asked, were you terrified of the bank? Did you face prejudice? How did you manage the anxiety of the war while signing those papers?
Because to a child, a house is just a house. It is the box you live in. You don't view it as a triumph. You view it as a static fact of your existence. Gil simply assumed the house was always there.
By the time she bought her own property and realized how stressful and chaotic real estate is, even in modern times, She finally understood the magnitude of her mother's achievement. But again, the moment to ask the deep, investigative questions had passed.
The materials offer another